Hi, good evening everyone. I'm Lavinia, head of international projects at the museum, and I'm very happy to welcome you here, and I'm very grateful that most of you made very long journeys to Iran. The July in the museum was intense, if not to say tense. We just finished the theatre festival Tolstoy, which brought almost 10,000 visitors to the estate, and we are going to have residence for musicians soon, and they're going to be school for literature teachers in July. But British Literature Seminar is a joy among all those events because it brings not only time and efforts but also happiness. We are very proud that during 4 years British Council, British Embassy were our partners to organize because they're perfect partners and friends. We would love to see you here, not only during British Literature Seminar, but we would be glad if you come any time of the year. And to confirm that, I would love to give you the card and to introduce you afterwards. So we've just introduced in the museum cards for museum friends, and a month ago we issued several museum friends cards, and the first one was given to one of our partners who helped us a lot during recent 5 years with digital projects. And if to be honest and to count by numbers, you should receive number 2nd, but to make it symbolic, it will be number 5, and I hope it will mean that we will have anniversary 5th seminar next year. And I'm happy to introduce Michael Bird. We rehearsed that I'm making a mistake right now, saying Director of the British Council in Russia, Cultural Council of the British Embassy.
Thank you very much. It is a joy. It is a joy to stand here with Yulia on the stage for the 4th time. And it's a joy to look out and see both old friends and new faces. And honestly, of all the great partners in Russia with whom the British Council, the British Embassy works, Yulia and Yasная Polyana are among the most special. And of all the programs that the British Council, the British Embassy does in Russia, British Literature Today for me is the most special. And for me that's because this is something that we, over the last 4 years, we have conceived and nurtured together. Those of you who were here in 2016 will remember that the first British Literature Today seminar was part of the UK-Russia Year of Language and Literature, which was also the quarter-centenary of Shakespeare's death. And I stood here then and I said, I hope we are going to make this an annual event. So in 2017, when we stood here for the 2nd time, I felt very proud that I had honoured my commitment and it had become an annual event. And then in 2018, we were all geared up to do British Literature Today for the 3rd time, and then the blow fell, and the British Council got told to stop its work in Russia. And it looked like it was all over, but we found a way of continuing our work as the Cultural and Education section of the British Embassy, and actually, a year ago, the 3rd British Literature Today seminar was our resurrection. I actually wrote a blog about last year, which was in homage to Tolstoy. I called it Resurrection, because it was our rebirth after a really, really difficult period. And here we are again, 2019, the UK-Russia Year of Music. And it's very special that we're doing the Year of Music. I mean, it's a miracle, actually, given the politics that we're doing the UK-Russia Year of Music. It's important that we're doing it. I'm sure everybody here feels the same, that when the political relations are difficult. The need for cultural relations is greater than ever. And music this year just gives us so much scope, because the power of music as a common language, the scope to explore music and literature and other art forms, and the sheer diversity of music on offer to us, the partnerships which give us the ability to take the UK-Russia Year of Music all over Russia. It's just great fun. In the last 10 days, we've brought UK acts to the Boyle Festival in Moscow. I have introduced Sir George Benjamin from the stage at the Mariinsky Theatre Concert Hall in St. Petersburg. Last weekend we had the NTS radio showcase at Strelka in Moscow. And this week we have British Literature Today at Yasnaya Polyana. And I would like to say a number of thank yous. I mean, very big thank yous to Lavinia and Jay and Fiona and Glenn and David and Diana for accepting our invitation and joining us for this event, for this Russian adventure. And thank you all. Thank you to all the participants. You know, the fact that every year we could fill this hall twice over. Actually, so many people apply to come. And my colleagues and I actually find that very, very inspiring. That tells us that we are doing something that's important, that means, and I know it means a lot to people. And I want to thank my associates and colleagues. I want to thank Anna Safronova here, who does our social media. I want to thank Anastasia Volkova towards the back, who handles our media relations. I'd like to thank our consultant, Nick Winters, also sitting near the back. And above all, I'd like to thank my colleague, Tatiana Ilina, whose original idea of British Literature Today is, and I can't see Lydia. And I was about to say that's probably because she's outside making something else happen. But I guess Lydia is the one person who all of us here know, because, I mean, seriously, she has put in all the work. I mean, she is the biggest single reason why we are all here this evening. Have a great evening. I look forward to talking to you all over a glass of wine after the...
Sorry, that sounded like final remarks. I will keep mine till the last day.
No, this is only the beginning, and that's what's so wonderful. Have a wonderful 3 days. Thank you very much. And now I would like to invite to the stage Lavinia Greenlaw, poet, novelist, professor of creative writing, and chair of the 4th British Literature Today Seminar at Yasная Poляna. Lavinia.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Yulia. I too want to start by saying thank you on behalf of us visiting writers. It's a joy and an honour to be here, and wonderful to be here with people who have come so far to talk to us about what we do, and that's overwhelming for us. We're very grateful. Particularly, I'd like to thank what I'm simply going to call the British Council, and the British Embassy, and Yasnaya Polyana. Everything has been fantastically well organised and thought through, and we're just having a wonderful time. I'm just going to put some thoughts about music in the air, and in doing so I'm going to introduce the 5 writers taking part, and then I'm going to read something about listening. There's a question most poets dread. What do you write about? Some will have an answer, cats and sunsets perhaps, but most won't. They aren't sure why they wrote about their last subject or what their next might be. Many would qualify the idea of a subject. The same can be true for prose writers, indeed for anyone for whom writing is inquiry, experiment, adventure. A subject in music, art, especially in the poem, is often a way of enacting or activating a more essential experience. So we don't write about a subject so much as through it. A poem about a cat or a sunset is actually about contact or vision or loss. This can work the other way. I've written a poem about metamorphosis that was really about a cat. Music is a notoriously difficult thing to write about. It is an abstract form that has a physical effect. It's an event, the way that the poet Robert Lowell said, a poem is an event, not a record of an event. Music takes place in time, and it activates things in the listener that have nothing to do with music at all. How you respond is shaped by who you are, where you are, what you remember, and what you know, all of which change from day to day. Music is image and sensation, polemic and rhetoric, disturbance and structure, imperative, reference point, landscape, psychogeographic location, punctuation, argument, persuasion, sedation, stimulation, pattern and code. It exists as notation and performance, as document, recording, object and memory, emblem and illusion, theory and mathematics. We encounter music intentionally and incidentally. We absorb it passively and actively. We think of it as expression, description, association, evocation, idea and event. We can write for or about music, with or against it. Writing can be too dependent on its music or not musical enough. And given that language depends on rhythm, tone and stress, every phrase, every utterance exists in relation to music. For some, music is a branch of knowledge, something to classify and collect. They enjoy the taxonomies of composers, bands, artists, labels, works, the signifiers and subcategories of genre and subgenre. Music can also be construed as a cultural phenomenon, playing a central role in identity, ideology, action and expression. It's also, of course, technology, from the panpipe to the laptop. There is the science of acoustics, the mathematics of composition, the psychology of its effects. There's music as icebreaker and wallpaper. Music is most simply vibration, disturbed air. But we don't experience it purely as this any more than we experience language purely as noise. As with other art forms, we make sense of music out of expectation, what we already know. Over the next few days, we'll be exploring music in these multi-directional, simultaneous and tangential ways. Oh yes, we will. We will make music, we won't make it, well, some of us might make music. We will make music our starting point, lifting off to explore language, phrase and argument. We might consider the power and dangers of the musical phrase, how we deploy and resist musicality. We'll explore music as formative to literary identity and as a cultural and political force. We'll look at ideas of authenticity and originality, canon and narrative. Music has been formative in how each of the writers here have shaped themselves and their relationship with the world. And this too will be part of our sessions, as we will go right back to the pre-music of early childhood, its sound and noise. As I exhaust myself and you with these endless facets and possibilities, I'm reminded how very hard it is to integrate music explicitly into our writing. In the Kreutzer Sonata, Tolstoy says, music is the shorthand of emotion, meaning, I suppose, direct connection or concise expression. This does not make music shorthand. Writers sometimes deploy a song or artist as a kind of brand name or emoji or domestic appliance. It's very difficult to do this kind of specific reference. It's very difficult to make this kind of specific reference into a resonant force. The novelist Diana Evans is expert at just this. Her work uses specific musical references, which you don't need to get, to convey aspects of human nature, the aspects of human nature that we're most inarticulate about. She's the acclaimed author of most recently Ordinary People, a New Yorker Book of the Year for which she recently received the South Bank Sky Arts Award. Music inhabits her work as touchstone, a form of articulation and translation, motivation and escape. It's also there in her writing, in the sweep and charge of her cadences. Her characters soothe and even delude themselves with music, another theme we'll touch upon. As George Eliot said, life seems to go without effort when I'm filled with music. We should pay careful attention to the word seems. In his lecture, The World of Opera, W.H. Auden speaks of extraordinary situations or states of violent emotion in which we feel an urgent need for utterance. We cannot remain silent. He means we must speak and we cannot speak, because in such situations, to go back to Auden, words would be an inadequate medium for such utterance, so we break into song. Ali Smith said of the poet J. Bernard, if there were ever to be a 21st century Auden, with all the invention and cultural understanding and a sense of the speed and the human outcome of foul politics, J. Bernard is it. Their first collection, Surge, recently published, has been keenly anticipated since their multidisciplinary work in progress, Surge Side A, won the Ted Hughes Award. Their poems register speechlessness as much as the determination to speak, and, much as Auden describes, break into song when confronting recent tragedies in which the victims have been written out or silenced. Fiona Maddox, in my view Britain's best classical music critic, illuminates a world that many people believe to be insular or difficult to engage with. Her criticism is not only a masterclass in describing, evoking and analysing music, but will always teach you something about how music works, and therefore about the nature of art. Her books include the indispensable Music for Life, a personal selection of works which is not only the perfect way to explore music, but an encouragement to develop your own taste. Fiona Maddox has also written two very different biographies, one about a 12th century woman composer, Hildegard of Bingen, who may not have written the works attributed to her, and the other about a contemporary composer, Harrison Birtwistle, who doesn't want to talk about his work. This last book is a masterpiece in interviewing technique, as conversations unfold over a year around the kitchen table. Key to this is Birtwistle's observation, I have always felt that I had a music in my head that didn't exist. I wanted to write a music that would retain its mysteries and never become familiar. This healthy respect for the aspect of composing that is about not knowing is worth keeping in mind. Music not only resists description, but dissection. As Emily Dickinson wrote, split the lark and you'll find the music, bulb after bulb in silver rolled. You're left with the components and could recreate the structure, but it will be lifeless. As we develop more sophisticated tools of analysis, we can lose sight of or lack trust in the deeper, less palpable, less rational aspects of the form. We want to know how music works, but we also need to continue to trust our deeper responses. We need to want to not to know too. Robert Musil, in his novel The Man Without Qualities, when he's talking about progress in the 20th century, says, to have eaten of one's mother's heart and so to understand the language of birds is more beautiful than an animal psychologist's study of the expressive values in birdsong. However intensely engaged with pop music you were when young, there comes a time when it no longer makes sense. This is part of its job. In Elizabeth Taylor's, not that Elizabeth Taylor, the other Elizabeth Taylor's novel, In a Summer Season, Ethel says, I really neither like it nor hate it. It just doesn't seem nearly as jolly as the tunes we had when I was a girl. And Lou replies, Mama says we have all the same tunes, but not played so well. If we are, as I am, the age of Lou's mother, we have an idea of where this new music has come from, but we don't understand what's changed, and so construe it as being played badly. David Keenan, novelist and music critic, has documented and dramatised key moments of music made new. His book, England's Hidden Reverse, is a cultural history of post-punk and industrial music in the UK. His debut novel, This is Memorial Device, is subtitled An Hallucinated Oral History of the Post-Punk Scene in Airdrie, Coatbridge and Environs, 1978 to 86. It was shortlisted for the Gordon Byrne Prize, and his second novel, For the Good Times, published this year, has just been shortlisted too. The second novel, For the Good Times, is set in the Troubles in Northern Ireland and draws on a different tradition of song, that of folk song and rebel song. A recent review in The Scotsman described the prose as some of the most lyrical and gruesome that I've read for a while. So we'll be talking about that. For David Keenan's, oh sorry, hang on a minute, where am I? This is Memorial Device asserts the importance of being the right age, in the right mood, in the right place, at the right time, while demonstrating that this could be any time, anywhere, and music can be a driving force for anything or anyone. For David Keenan's characters, however nihilistic or offhand they appear, music is a matter of life or death. Can we ever talk about music as if we don't care? In Chekhov's story After the Theatre, Nadia remembered what a beautiful expression, pleading, guilty, gentle, Gorny wore whenever anyone discussed music with him, and what efforts it cost him to keep a ring of enthusiasm out of his voice. In a society where coolness, hauteur and nonchalance are judged signs of breeding and good manners, one must hide one's passions. When we sing, dance or play music, we feel that we've both escaped ourselves and are more ourselves than ever. Rainer Maria Rilke pinpoints this in his poem To Music, where he says, when the innermost point in us stands outside at the most practiced distance, as the other side of the air. It is this idea of practiced distance, familiar steps, which we depend on and through which we release ourselves. This morning we had the pleasure, as I think you have had as well, of going around Tolstoy's estate, and I knew he had some interest in and relationship with Dickens, but I hadn't realised how prominently Dickens would feature in his home. So I brought a bit of Dickens, which describes a country fair dance, so a 19th century country fair dance. I would say it also describes a 1970s village hall disco, and I hope you all have had a version of this experience in your life. The dancing itself begs description. Every figure lasts about an hour, and the ladies bounce up and down the middle with a degree of spirit which is quite indescribable. As to the gentlemen, they whirl, embracing and knocking up against the other couples until they're fairly tired out and can move no longer. The same scene is repeated again and again, slightly varied by an occasional row, until at a late hour at night. And a great many clerks and apprentices find themselves next morning with aching heads, empty pockets, damaged hats, and a very imperfect recollection of how it was they did not get home. Which leads me to Glyn Maxwell somehow. Glyn Maxwell, another poet with a close relationship to Auden, has from the start of his career paid more than usual attention to the music of form. Joseph Brodsky said that he covers a greater distance in a single line than most people do in a poem. Glyn Maxwell observed that those who reject form in poetry reject form in body. A good poem is strung upon a version of itself that is mechanical, fixed, monotonous, one that obeys an average heartbeat, clockwork breath, steady blood, measured footfall. Some readers like their actual poems that way. They prefer a lullaby to a story. Glyn Maxwell has a consummate sense of how to place form and tension like this, and has pursued his interest in the musicality of language to make award-winning work in opera, theatre and song. His verse novel, Time's Fool, a version of the story of the Flying Dutchman, is in production as a feature film. I was about to read this book of Tolstoy, and I thought for a moment it was something I said myself, because it feels like something I would want to say myself. Music makes me forget myself. We're back to the Kreutzer Sonata, although obviously this is in very different circumstances, because it led to a murder. It doesn't lead me to murder, but it has led me to mistakes. Tolstoy. So this is that great speech about how the music carries him past the point where he can no longer control feeling and therefore leads to the terrible act. Music makes me forget myself, my real position. It transports me to some other position, not my own. Under the influence of music, it seems to me that I feel what I do not really feel. I understand what I do not understand, that I can do what I cannot do. I would argue that music can carry us over this chasm of not feeling, understanding or doing, to the extent that we find we do. It can also, as Tolstoy so painfully demonstrates, open up feelings that we can then not control. The poet Thomas Campion advised us to tune thy music to thy heart. Sometimes we tune our hearts to music. I'm going to read you something I wrote about my teenage years in the 1970s, about waiting and listening. By the age of 10, I was aware of the difference between buying an album of Top of the Pops cover versions in Woolworths and going into a record shop to buy an original record. I still did my shopping in Woolworths, but that year I bought the first record that felt like an investment, Chicory Tip's Son of My Father. Did I buy it because it had been written by Giorgio Moroder and was the first record featuring a synthesizer to reach number one? Of course not, I was 10. Only a few years later, songwriters, synthesizers, labels and producers would matter to me very much indeed. Possessed by music, I gathered the courage to enter a proper record shop. I knew what I wanted. I'd listened to it on John Peel's radio show and read about it in the New Musical Express, but I had no idea what else I might like. A good record shop was like a good bookshop. There was someone there who could lead you from what you wanted to where it came from. You might start with the pop group and move on to the New Age Steppers, and then Augustus Pablo and Hugh Mundell, or go from Jar Wobble back to Can and beyond them to Stockhausen. My local record shop was also a place where I could stand next to the people I wanted to be, the older, cooler, more glamorous kids. It took me some time to realise that I was the only girl there, and that while boys were willing to talk to me about music, they weren't that interested in me talking back. I'm sure that's changed. Even so, I became part of the edge of this gang by sheer force of turning up at the record shop after class, at the backstreet pub, at the gigs in a bunker under the football stand where I saw bands like Essential Logic and Swell Naps. I never felt like I belonged, but I was sure of my relationship with the music. I was a teenager at a time when the best you could hope for by way of a social forum was a room of your own and something on which to play music. With no virtual wall to advertise yourself on, you used actual ones. I covered mine with a montage I added to each week by cutting pictures out of fanzines and the music press. I used posters for gigs and political rallies, and random newspaper headlines. The first thing we did when entering a friend's room was go through their record collection. It was how you presented yourself and how you were judged. Like a profile on a networking site, your record collection advertised your personality, style, passions, hopes and dreams. Only it wasn't hidden away on the computer. It took up space. At 16, if I wanted to make a private phone call, that is, if I wanted to speak to a boy, I left the house. I walked through the village, past 3 pubs, and out beyond the first farm to where a phone box stood on the grass verge. There was plenty that could go wrong. Someone might be there already, in which case I had to wait, at first politely, invisibly in the dark, and then, if they took more than a minute or two, encroaching on the phone box's puddle of light. A grown-up would have rapped on the glass, whereas I could not bring myself to act. Waiting was agony, but all I could do was will them to finish. Did they not know that this was a matter of life and death, that I had to speak to him now? Maybe no one was in, and nobody had an answering machine. I might get a wrong number or a crossed line and use up my money interrupting strangers, or I'd get through and feed the first of my stack of 2p pieces into the machine for it to be ignored, spat out, either way leaving me cut off. I had to ring the operator and persuade her to allow me 2p worth of time, about 3 minutes. Sometimes it worked. I made the call, the boy was there and wanted to speak to me, and all of a sudden I could hear him. He was intensely present, imagined and actual in the same moment. Our conversations were inept and brief, not least because phone calls were expensive. You used up your money and you did not ask people to ring you back. Phone calls were something in which you invested. For those minutes I could hear the voice of the boy I was in love with, or the silence between us. I listened hard. Then I walked home through the dark, turning over every syllable, stress, pause and intonation, until the conversation became fixed as a song. Hearing a song that had captivated me was like getting that boy on the phone. There were so many things that made it unlikely. Even now, I get a rush of exhilaration when I hear David Bowie's Starman or Mark Bolan's Metal Guru. When they were released, I was 9 years old and got to hear them maybe 3 times a week, if they were on Top of the Pops or Radio 1, which I could listen to before school or in bed. I was not quite ready to go out and buy my own records, and these songs, even now that I can carry them in my pocket, remain tantalizing. Before I knew where to find music, I had to make do with what was there. My parents had a handful of pop albums. My mother said, "These are from the time your father tried to be swinging." Dylan, Moody Blues, the Beatles, which I absorbed without preconception or expectation, and with total concentration. Later, I knew too much and didn't trust myself. Someone I admired had said that the Stranglers were good. Why didn't I like them? Maybe I did. No, I didn't. They were pub rock. Maybe I wasn't listening to them in the right way. Was there a right way? Maybe I was wrong about other bands too. What should I like? What couldn't I like? And why couldn't I like what I thought I liked? What did I like? And how could I be in love with a boy who liked that? Records were expensive and hard to get hold of. I'd make the trip into town to that record shop, not knowing if they'd managed to get hold of whatever I'd saved up for, or if it had already sold out. I read about forthcoming releases and held my breath. X-Ray Specs, Devo, Susie and the Banshees, would I be able to get it on coloured vinyl? Would I be able to get it at all? Our money was present tense, our economy straightforward cash. No one had a checkbook or credit card. We bartered with the shop which sold our old records second-hand and with each other. What was it like to be someone with every record at their fingertips, one of those radio DJs whose rooms were lined with vinyl? They had everything, so surely they had my song, whatever my song then was. I was listening and waiting. For several weeks in 1980, my song was Joy Division's Atmosphere. I was at the highest point of infatuation with this song. That is, when it's taken shape in my head, but still feels astonishingly new every time I hear it. I was still waiting for it to arrive in the record shop, and one night I lay in the bath for the whole of John Peel's show as the water grew cold, not daring to move in case he played it. He did, and I burst into tears. Waiting for a song was like waiting for a bus to arrive in that village. I would stand on the side of the road an hour after it was due, unable to accept that it wasn't about to turn up. Sure, in fact, that as soon as I got home and closed the door, it would. A bus, a record, a boy. I could create the right conditions, but to some extent, all were beyond my control. My record collection was limited. I purged it of disco, soul, and hippie shit, and was reconstructing it as guardedly as I was reconstructing myself. It had to be right. There were always new songs. While waiting to hear what I liked, I had listened to hours of other music, and something might catch my attention. I'd be excited about one song, only to find myself distracted by another. Songs flickered out of car windows and shop doorways. They found me and made sure I kept coming across them, until one day they were in my head and I wanted to hear them. I missed something I hadn't possessed. What more delicate form of seduction can there be? We listen harder to anything we can't quite hear, and in those days this meant not just availability but the quality of the sound. My transistor radio worked best 3 inches from my ear. I spent almost as much time tuning it as listening, perching it on a shelf or windowsill, tweaking the aerial this way and that. I managed to get my parents' old box gramophone for my room and listened to its woolly sound without frustration. Every piece of technology we had, from our cars to our central heating, was temperamental, and so we expected difficulty. The stylus was unbalanced, picked up fluff, skidded across a walk and got stuck on a scratch. Wires had to be tickled into place. I hoped and strained, adapting from one moment to the next. Listening was simplified when my father invested in a neat little turntable and a pair of lightweight speakers, but the sound coming out of that machine made no noise at all. Yet I expected nothing more until I made friends with people who owned hi-fi systems. On these machines, the same songs unfurled and blossomed. They were larger, clearer, brighter. What I'd been listening to on the little stereo at home was no more than a diagram. When I bought an album, I put it on the start of side 1, turned it over and listened to the end of side 2. At first I'd concentrate on the tracks I already knew, but often these were the ones whose charm wore off as less obvious songs revealed their depths. Like many people, I have hundreds of songs imprinted on my memory, to which I can sing along. I know every whoop and shalala, yet I cannot conjure them from silence, perhaps because I absorbed that music as a listener and can only reenact that listening. If I wanted someone else to listen, I leapt up and down, wrenching the stylus away from one track and putting on another, saying, "Do you like this? You'll love this. What do you think? Great, isn't it?" I was slightly doing that last night, for which I apologise. At such moments, I wasn't actually listening. I was showing a song to someone. I made the music that had seduced me part of the seduction. When CDs first appeared, I could tell the difference between them and vinyl instantly. They sounded freeze-dried, but I liked being able to swoop down on a track, repeat it endlessly, and skip those I wasn't sure about simply by pressing a button marked skip. I could sit across the room with a remote control and choose my song. The neat square package and shiny disc were pleasingly novel, and I didn't miss the scratches and bumps. Everyone's records disappeared, and their music equipment grew smaller and smaller. Was music becoming less important? Or was this the stylish and convenient way to proceed? I didn't notice that I'd stopped playing records or how much I'd grown used to the new technology until the day I tried to insert a single into a CD player. I adapted to digital production the way I might get used to mountain air. Everything was clean and in place and extremely bright, and this made me uneasy until I came to expect it. Like the acute focus of camera zoom, digital recording seemed more real than the real thing. It took music further away from what it actually sounded like, and so acoustic performances, especially orchestras and operas, might now sound wildly unregulated. The internet is my record-lined room. While I waited each Thursday for the possibility of David Bowie singing Starman, I can now watch the same episode of Top of the Pops on YouTube. I can make a playlist in a kind of supermarket dash, veering around, grabbing, adding and deleting. I can be distracted by algorithms, the crudeness of the if you like this, you might like that. Or I can become completely paralysed, concussed by choice. I suspect that I take even longer to make a playlist today than I did a mixtape. Too easy? Maybe, but all that saving up and waiting around wasn't easy enough. I had the appetite for it back then and the time to waste. What I miss is the seduction, the glimpse and tease of a song that has got into my head but is not there yet for me to hear whenever I want to. I am disappointed, not in technology, in myself. Of course I could still sit and listen to an album from beginning to end over and over, but instead I started first with the passive type of eclecticism, leaving my iPod on shuffle. I was looking for that old feeling of surprise and delight, which wasn't going to arise because I did know what I was waiting to hear. My most focused recent listening experience has been to music that I wouldn't want to follow me home. I'm not going to do the washing up to Stockhausen. I enjoy the kind of contemporary classical and experimental and electroacoustic music that reveals itself in performance. Kurtag and Shirino have been for me as visceral an experience as Per Ubu or the pop group live almost 40 years ago. I had CDs of both composers' work, but rarely listened to them, which bothered me until I decided that it was a virtue of this music, that it meant so much more life, that it expected me to go to it, to wait and stop and listen. Just as music has become more accessible, it has become more abstract. CDs, which once seemed ridiculously compact, are now clutter. But we're unnerved by this and glad to be offered artwork and sleeve notes along with our downloads. An MP3 file is a song, but a record is a thing that contains a song. And it's as if we still need our music to arrive in a package or vehicle. Perhaps now, instead of imagining the song, I should be imagining its material substance, the idea of the record. Perhaps it was the idea of the song, like the idea of the boy, that interested me most. I'm just going to finish with a poem called Silent Disco, which I don't know if it still happens. Anyone know if silent disco still happens? There was a phase, does it? There was a phase of it, and I first, this idea of putting on headphones, everyone with headphones on, dancing together. And at first I thought it was a terrible idea, a outrage against disco. And then I was stuck in a house in Nova Scotia with a radio producer, and all we had was an iPod and a crate of beer, and we had silent disco, and it was just brilliant. It was really good. We should do that over here. This is really about dancing. Silent disco. She's dancing to a song you can't hear, to inner signals rather than noise. They give such pure direction. For once there is an only way. She's not listening. Something's arising, a thought that has to be kept moving, a place in herself that was once so full. You think you know her by that gesture, the flick and twist of her hand as it lifts to catch at her nape as her head tips sideways, but this is routine. A move perfected while she was waiting long and quietly for someone to let her in. There followed the summer of dancing, out in the dark beyond the last houses, among the sneaking holly and dogwood, in a breeze-block creosote prefab temple, by day a world of jumble and cordial, by night a heaven of lime and ring. The look on her face is filling the room. Someone else would describe it as joyful. Only to you it is space she is taking, and you will never have seen her so clearly, so within she forgets herself as seen. She is pure direction. She is line and green.